Karen blocked my wife from entering our house. Then I walked out in my FBI jacket. You'd be amazed how fast a clipboard turns into a weapon when it's held by the wrong person. And you'd be even more amazed how fast it disappears when an FBI badge enters the conversation. It was supposed to be a quiet morning. Just coffee, groceries, and a walk back home. But when my wife, Camille, stepped out of her car on our own driveway and was blocked by a woman we'd never met claiming she didn't belong here, everything changed. She didn't know who Camille was. She definitely didn't know who I was. But she was about to learn. Part 1. They say your house is your safe place. They don't tell you what it feels like to watch someone try to rip that safety away from your spouse just because of the color of her skin. My name's Jordan Wells. I'm a federal agent with the FBI, Behavioral Threat Assessment Unit. My job is to spot danger before it turns into disaster. I've studied hate crimes, extremist rhetoric, domestic terror threats, but I didn't expect the most personal case of racial intimidation I'd ever encounter to walk right up our driveway with a clipboard. My wife, Camille, is a pediatric oncologist. That morning, she'd just come back from a 36-hour hospital shift, hair tied back, flats on her feet, groceries in one hand and her purse in the other. She parked in front of our own house, our mortgage approved, deed verified, 2-car garage home in Sycamore Creek, and barely had a foot out the door when Karen showed up. I watched from the living room window, cup of coffee in hand, still in my gray FBI PT shirt. It was supposed to be my day off. I heard Camille's car door shut. Then a voice sharp, nasal, commanding, excuse me, can I help you?" Camille turned slowly. "Pardon me." Karen stepped directly in front of her. "You can't park here." Camille blinked. "This is my house." Karen narrowed her eyes like she'd been challenged. "This property is registered to Jordan and Camille Wells. I know everyone who lives on this street. That's me, Camille Wells." "No, you're not," Karen said with that same smug certainty I'd seen in hundreds of surveillance videos. "You're trespassing." That's when I stepped out. I walked calmly onto the porch, coffee still in hand, adrenaline quietly sparking beneath my skin. Karen's eyes darted to me. I could see the shift, that flash of confusion trying to reconcile her belief system with reality. "Is there a problem?" I asked. Karen hesitated. She was trying to enter the house. I didn't recognize her. I thought she might be my wife. I cut in. "That's who she is." Karen turned red but kept her chin high. "I'm part of the Sycamore Creek Neighborhood Standards Committee. We've had some issues lately, loitering, suspicious individuals. I'm just trying to maintain safety." Camille raised an eyebrow. "You mean black people?" Karen's eyes widened. "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to," Camille said. I walked down the steps and stood between them. Not aggressive, just presence. "I work for the federal government," I said calmly, "and I'd like to see your authority to question residents on their own property." Karen lifted her clipboard. "I have documents, guidelines. Our board empowers us to enforce standards. We were approved under HOA charter. There is no HOA charter filed with the county." I interrupted. "I checked before we close escrow. Whatever group you're claiming to represent is a volunteer committee with no legal authority." She blinked. I continued. "And you just attempted to bar a resident from her own property based on your personal judgment. That's harassment, possibly even civil rights intimidation." "I didn't touch her," Karen said quickly. "But you blocked her." I said, "That's obstruction. You accused her of being an intruder. In front of neighbors. Without cause. That's defamation." Karen looked around, and that's when she noticed 2 other neighbors were watching. Phones out. Recording. Her smile faltered. Camille, still standing tall, opened our front door with her key, stepped inside, and came back out with the deed in hand. She handed it to Karen. "My face is on this document," she said. "My name is on the mortgage. My blood, sweat, and hospital night shifts paid for every square foot of this land. You don't get to question whether I belong." Karen didn't take the paper. She just turned and walked away. muttering something about community standards and sensitive people, but she didn't know what door she'd just kicked open. That night, I made some calls. I pulled Karen's full name from her mail slot on the community board, Karen Whitmore. I looked into her public records. No formal HOA filings, no elected positions, just a woman with a clipboard and an overinflated sense of power. But the kicker, she'd filed 5 incident reports in the last 6 months, all against residents of color, 2 black families, 1 Indian couple, and 1 Latino teen who delivered for DoorDash. Each one claimed suspicious activity or loitering. None of them resulted in any action. I filed a formal complaint with the County Civil Review Board and sent a copy to the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division under Title II, ADA, and fair housing violations. Because Karen thought this was about a gate, or a car, or a clipboard, but she'd made it about color, and now it was about consequences. The next morning, Camille came downstairs with her coffee and found me typing. "Are you starting a report?" she asked. "No," I said. "I'm building a case." Part 2. I've been trained to identify patterns, what's random noise and what's intentional behavior. What Karen did on our driveway wasn't an isolated lapse in judgment. It was a calculated decision built on entitlement and ignorance, the kind that festers when no one checks it. And now that I'd seen her in action, I knew I wasn't just dealing with a nosy neighbor. I was staring straight at a localized, unchecked abuse of power. The next few days, I quietly worked the neighborhood. Not as an agent, just a man with a clipboard of my own and a notebook full of questions. It started with the 2 families she'd reported for suspicious behavior. The Jenkins family, 3 doors down, black couple, 2 kids, lovely garden. Mr. Jenkins, a retired school principal, looked shocked when I brought up Karen's name. "She reported us," he asked. "For what? Loitering on your own porch?" He chuckled, then got quiet. "You know, she warned us once, said our wind chimes were disturbing the visual balance of the block." My wife cried for 2 days. I moved on to the Perez's Latino family, second-generation Americans. They told me Karen had followed their teenage son one afternoon, accusing him of casing houses. He was delivering groceries for Instacart. She even called the police. The officer who showed up apologized and left without filing a report. He said, "Was sorry, we've had a few of these from her," Mrs. Perez said, "but nothing ever happens." So I dug deeper. I filed a FOIA request to the local police department for all neighborhood complaints from Karen Whitmore over the past year. 17 report, 4 for suspicious loitering, 3 for loud conversation in driveways, 2 for unregistered pets, and at least 6 that reference people she described as out of place, possibly undocumented, or pretending to be residents. There was a racial descriptor in 100% of them. That's not coincidence. That's profiling. And worse, most of her letters were stamped with Sycamore Creek HOA compliance, a body that doesn't exist. Camille and I had a long talk that night. She wanted to file civil action immediately, but I asked her to wait just a little, because I wasn't just building a complaint. I was building a civil rights exposure case. Next step, interview the neighbors she hadn't targeted. Mostly white families, folks who'd lived here longer, or those she seemed to approve of. Most of them were cordial, a few defensive. One man, Tom Duncan, finally admitted, "She's a little intense," but I figured she meant well. I showed him the footage Karen blocking Camille from our house, the confrontation that followed. He went pale. I didn't know it went that far. That's the problem. I told him, it always goes that far. People just don't always film it. Then came the break. I met with a woman named Andrea Scott, former board member of a real HOA from another neighborhood Karen had lived in 5 years earlier. She did the same thing there. Andrea said, filed fake code violation reports, tried to get a vote to ban non-standard cultural decor. She even tried to remove a family for hosting too many barbecues. They were Nigerian immigrants. She wasn't successful, I asked. She moved out before the vote, Andrea said, but not before she started her own standards advisory group. It was just her and a printer, same pattern, different zip code. I compiled everything. Witness statements, Complaint history, false enforcement records, racial profiling patterns, fake documents citing HOA power, and the now viral video of Karen confronting Camille on our own property. Camille and I decided it was time. We filed a formal complaint with the County Civil Rights Commission, the Department of Justice's Civil Division, and the State Attorney General's Office for Civil Rights Intimidation, impersonation of authority, and harassment with discriminatory intent. And then, the story broke. Thanks to a local reporter who'd seen the video and tracked down our filings, the news spread fast. Headline on the front page of the county paper, fake HOA president accused of targeting Black and brown families. FBI agent exposes discrimination scheme. The online article went viral within hours. Comment sections flooded. She tried that in our neighborhood too. We didn't even have an HOA. This is how modern racism hides behind clipboards and community standards. To the agent and his wife, thank you for standing up. By the end of the day, the reporter told me they had 12 more families across 2 counties reaching out with similar stories. Karen wasn't just a nuisance. She was running a pattern of racially targeted harassment disguised as neighborhood concern. Then the knock came. Not at our door, at hers. A pair of plainclothes investigators from the Civil Rights Commission. They served her with an investigatory summons, demanding financial disclosures, records of neighborhood complaints, and any communication tied to her standards committee. She refused to answer questions, slammed the door, but the wheels were turning, fast. Camille came home late that night and found me on the porch, laptop open, files stacked beside me. She leaned down, kissed my temple. "You're working again," she said softly. "This is personal." "I know," she said, "but it's not just about us anymore." I nodded. "Close the laptop. Let's finish this." Part 3. People like Karen don't operate in the open, not really. They operate in the cracks between silence and bureaucracy. They print their own titles, cite rules that don't exist, and count on the rest of us being too polite or too tired to call them out. But the moment the truth starts leaking through those cracks, everything behind the clipboard falls apart. 3 days after our case hit the news, Karen's world began to collapse. It started small neighbors quietly removing HOA compliance signs from their windows, which we later found out she had distributed, unofficially labeling certain homes as in good standing, a subtle caste system, in plain sight. By the end of the week, over 20 residents had joined a community thread called Truth in Sycamore Creek. Every one of them had a story. A woman named Priya shared how Karen confronted her for unauthorized Diwali lights and threatened her with a $200 code fine. Priya paid it out of fear her family would be seen as a nuisance. Another man, Miguel, said Karen reported his elderly mother for hanging laundry in public view. She was drying a handmade quilt. "I should have spoken up then," he told me, "but she made us feel like we were the ones in the wrong." Every family Karen had targeted had 2 things in common. They didn't fit the picture Karen had in her head of what belonged. They never pushed back until now. I kept digging. I pulled public records on Karen's so-called committee. No registration, no tax ID, no election history. But I did find something else. A PayPal account linked to the email address she used on her fake violation notices. It had received over $11,000 in the last 18 months. Label HOA fees, Sycamore Creek. Problem was, no legal HOA existed in Sycamore Creek, not since 2017. She'd been collecting money from residents, illegally, threatening non-compliance, enforcing citations, all under the guise of community safety. This wasn't just harassment, it was fraud. That's when I called in a favor. I contacted a colleague at the local U.S. Attorney's Office, not to intervene but to observe. I needed someone with authority to see how far this went. 2 days later, Karen's so-called committee treasurer, a man named Walt Hensley, was served a federal subpoena. He cracked under pressure in 12 hours. Said Karen told him to keep funds off the books to avoid government interference. She'd been using the money to upgrade neighborhood visibility, including fake signs, traffic cones, even a branded jacket embroidered with HOA enforcement. He showed them receipts and emails. One email from Karen read, "It's not about laws, it's about presence. If people think we're official, they'll comply. Fear keeps order." Another, "We need to start flagging the new families. Too much non-compliance from the renters and culture types. Remind them this isn't a public park." It was the smoking gun, the kind of language that gets you sued, or worse. Meanwhile, Karen tried to spin it. She sent a mass email to the neighborhood. "There is a coordinated attack being launched against our efforts to preserve the beauty and integrity of Sycamore Creek. This is not about race. It's about pride and safety." It didn't work. Half the neighborhood hit reply all with screenshots of her fines, her threats, her quotes, and one reply came from Camille. She didn't mince words. "Karen, you tried to block me from my own home because you didn't recognize me. Because I didn't look like what you think a homeowner should look like. You made me feel like a trespasser in the life I built. But guess what? I'm still here, and you're not in charge anymore." Then came the public meeting. The county called it an extraordinary neighborhood governance review session. In plain terms, a reckoning. We all showed up: residents, investigators, press, even former victims from Karen's last neighborhood. She walked in wearing a beige blazer and a pin that read, "Protect our streets." But there was no confidence in her stride this time. No clipboard, just a stack of wrinkled papers and eyes that wouldn't meet anyone's. Camille spoke first. Not me, not the lawyers. Camille. She walked to the podium, stood tall in heels she hadn't worn since her last conference, and said, "I save lives for a living. I spend 16-hour days in cancer wards, holding children's hands while their parents break. And yet, the thing that broke me last month wasn't death. It was a woman with a clipboard telling me I didn't belong in my own home." The room was silent. Then she held up the fake violation notice Karen had given her. "She thought I'd stay quiet. She thought I'd be grateful just to exist here." She was wrong. The investigation findings followed her fraud. Unauthorized collection of fees, false representation of government authority, targeted civil harassment based on race and origin, attempted zoning manipulation through fraudulent reports. Karen's face fell with every word. The final decision: permanent dissolution of her neighborhood standards committee, full repayment to every family she charged, a cease and desist order banning her from any civic enforcement activity in the county, and pending a review from the state attorney's office for possible civil rights charges. Karen stormed out. For once, no one followed her. And Sycamore Creek, it started healing. Camille came home that night and stood on our porch for a while. "I never thought it would go this far," she said. "It went exactly as far as it needed to." I replied. She nodded, then whispered, "You think she'll come back?" "No," I said. "But if she does, we'll be ready." Part 4. Justice doesn't always come with handcuffs. Sometimes it starts with a clipboard and ends with silence. The kind that settles in when a whole community finally sees someone for who they really are. Karen Whitmore built her power on performance. She wore authority like a costume, but the moment that costume got ripped away, there was nothing underneath, and we were done pretending. A week after the public meeting, Sycamore Creek was different. The HOA-style signs Karen had nailed to streetlights gone. The self-issued compliance notices on front doors shredded and burned at the community barbecue. Even the color-coded flags she'd placed on mailboxes to track compliance: green for good, yellow for watch lists, red for repeat violators, had become the punchline of neighborhood memes. Someone printed shirts: "I got a red flag from Karen, and I framed it, Camille," and I laughed for the first time in weeks. But beneath the jokes, the gears of accountability were still turning. The County Fraud Investigation Division officially released its report. Karen had collected $12,875 in unregulated fines and fees. She'd written no fewer than 41 fake citations. At least 11 families had made legal payments to her personal accounts. She'd submitted 4 falsified property complaints to the Planning Commission, all targeting homes owned by families of color. And she'd issued multiple false statements to law enforcement, which under Texas law qualified as filing a fraudulent report. The state had everything they needed. And so, on a Tuesday morning, without drama or delay, Karen Whitmore was arrested. The charge sheet was lengthy, fraudulent impersonation of a municipal authority, unauthorized collection of civic fees, filing false reports to law enforcement, harassment and intimidation with discriminatory intent, civil rights violations under the Fair Housing Act, and obstruction of property use without legal authority. The local DA called it one of the most egregious abuses of perceived community power they'd seen in decades. Karen posted bail the next day, but the public had already sentenced her. Camille and I didn't gloat. We didn't have to. But when the story broke on Channel 6 News with the mugshot and the headline, "Fake HOA leader charged with civil rights violations after blocking Black woman from her home," our phones exploded. Friends, colleagues, former neighbors. Even two of Karen's previous victims from another county reached out. One woman wrote, "She humiliated me in front of my children. You gave us all a voice." "Thank you," Camille cried when she read it. Then she got up, grabbed her stethoscope, and went to work her shift. Because healing people is what she does, even when others try to tear her down. The community organized a Reclaim the Block event the following weekend. No speeches, no protests, just a gathering, food trucks, music, sidewalk chalk for the kids, and a new community mural, this one painted across the ugly wooden fence Karen once used to divide her property from her undesirable neighbors. The mural showed people holding hands across different homes. Above them, in bold spray paint, "We belong." Together, Camille and I stood quietly, arms around each other. No one mentioned Karen's name. She was already gone. But the legal process moved forward. Karen's defense strategy, claiming she believed she had legal power. That misunderstanding was the root of it. That it wasn't about race. The prosecution shredded it. They showed the emails, the color-coded watch list, the recorded phone call where Karen said, and I quote, "If we don't keep these people in check, this neighborhood will slide. They don't understand standards like we do." That line became her legacy. The trial wasn't televised, but transcripts leaked. Testimony from our neighbors crushed any lingering doubt. Paul, the veteran Karen fined for military paraphernalia, testified about her threats. Priya described paying a fine for celebrating Diwali. The Paresis testified how Karen called the cops on their teenage son while he was making deliveries. And then, Camille testified. She told the court about that moment, groceries in hand, keys in her purse, blocked on her own driveway. She finished with this. She didn't see a doctor coming home. She didn't see a woman who spent all night fighting leukemia in a child's body. She saw a color and a stereotype. She saw something to control. The verdict, guilty, on all counts. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge was clear. Your actions were not just unlawful, they were corrosive. You weaponized perception to harm good people and hid behind a title no one gave you. This court sentences you to 4 years in state custody with eligibility for parole in 2. You are further ordered to pay restitution to all affected residents. Karen didn't speak. Not one word. She's serving her sentence now. Her house was sold at auction. The money helped cover part of the restitution and Sycamore Creek. It finally started to become what it always pretended to be, a community. We didn't stop with justice. We built something better. Camille co-founded an organization called Front Porch Equity, dedicated to educating neighborhoods on housing discrimination, microaggression policies, and civic accountability. I help with background checks and legal consulting. We've already helped 5 other neighborhoods expose their own Karens. We speak at conferences now. One of Camille's presentations went viral. My house, my name, my right to stand on my own porch. She finishes it with a single photo, the MRI of a child's heart. Healthy, strong, alive. Because for her, it's always about saving lives, even from across a driveway. I still think about that morning. The sun, the silence, the audacity of it all. I remember standing on our porch with a cup of coffee, watching Karen wag her finger at my wife like she had power. And I remember walking out that door, not as a federal agent, not as a symbol, just a husband who was done letting people like Karen write the rules. Part 5. Justice is powerful, but what comes after justice, that's where real change lives. Not in the courtroom, not in the sentencing, but in the sidewalks we repaint, the neighbors we trust again, the voices we finally hear. This is the story of what we rebuilt after Karen Whitmore fell. Sycamore Creek didn't change overnight, but it started showing up for itself. The first thing to go was fear. People stopped whispering when they talked about what Karen had done. They started speaking out loud, in open air on porches, in grocery aisles, at neighborhood watch meetings, and when someone else tried to throw around a clipboard or a rule. Folks knew better. They asked questions, they demanded proof, and when there wasn't any, they said no. That alone was a revolution. Camille and I didn't just go back to normal. We created something new. She helped launch the Sycamore Creek Civic Inclusion Committee, a real, registered body made up of volunteers from every background: Black, Latino, Asian, white, disabled, veteran, LGBTQ+. Their mission wasn't to control, but to connect. They didn't issue fines. They issued resources, help with ADA compliance paperwork, conflict mediation training, workshops on implicit bias and inclusive design. Camille led the first workshop herself. She called it From Clipboards to Compassion: Reimagining Community Power. I worked with the County Civil Rights Board to develop a neighborhood oversight toolkit. It included a checklist to verify if your HOA is legally filed, a guide for reporting neighborhood-based harassment, a template for cease and desist letters to fake authority figures, and a guide for allyship for residents who witness abuse but aren't sure how to intervene. We printed 1,000 copies. They disappeared in a week. Now they're hosted online and have been downloaded more than 85,000 times. That toolkit, it started on my kitchen table, right next to Camille's stethoscope. One of the most powerful things we did was hold a community story night. No podiums, no speeches, just folding chairs on front lawns, a mic, and a speaker system. People came from 4 blocks over. They shared the little things Karen had done: the glares, the warnings, the passive-aggressive letters taped to doors, and they shared what they had stayed silent about, out of fear. Until now, Paul, the veteran, spoke about the day she threatened to fine him for flying his service flag. Priya cried as she talked about hiding her Diwali lights inside after Karen called them distracting. Miguel read a poem written by his teenage son, titled Not a Package, Not a Suspect, Just Your Neighbor. Camille didn't speak that night. She just sat beside me, her hand wrapped around mine, eyes shining. The mural on Karen's old fence stayed. In fact, it grew. New panels were added every month. Kids painted their families. Seniors painted sunrises. One panel had Camille drawn in full scrubs, holding a clipboard that said, "Hope, not citations." We called it the Wall of Return because it helped give people their voice back. Funny thing is, Karen's old house, it sold to a couple from Louisiana, both public school teachers, Black and proud. Their youngest daughter's in a wheelchair. She helped paint a rainbow ramp on the fence. And Alyssa, remember the girl from the beginning of this story? She started a youth leadership club called Front Yard Freedom. Her motto: if you're on your porch, you're home. No one gets to question that. She raised money for new wheelchair-accessible sidewalks. She led a student petition to rename the old HOA lane into Harmony Way. She even hosted a podcast with Camille titled Let Me in Stories of Belonging. They interviewed residents, activists, even lawyers who'd seen cases like ours nationwide. By the end of the year, they had over 10,000 listeners. And as for me, I got promoted. But more importantly, I got purpose. I now work part-time on a federal task force that investigates HOA-based civil rights violations. It's not flashy work, but it's personal. Every time I see a video of a so-called community enforcer harassing a person for walking, parking, or existing, I think about that morning. The way Karen stood between my wife and her own home. The way she said, "You don't live here." And I think we made sure she can't say that again. There's one final moment I want to share. It was a year after the confrontation. Camille and I stood on our front lawn. Neighbors gathered to dedicate a small plaque beneath the mural. The inscription was short: To those who stood up, to those who stayed loud, to those who said, "This is my home," you changed more than a street. You changed everything. Camille squeezed my hand, and I whispered what I hadn't said since that first day welcome home. Let them come with their fake rules, their printed fines, their manufactured fear. Let them doubt your name, your face, your place, and then meet them right there, with truth, with proof, with presence, because belonging isn't something they can give you, it's something you never needed to ask for. The end.